not going to give a formal presentation. I'm just going to talk off the cuff about my relationship with Jane Goodall, and I think people here didn't realize that she had a presence here, that back in the early 2000, she had her headquarters for the Roots and Shoots program for youth right here. I think it was 245 Main Street. That was her headquarters. And that didn't mean she was here all the time, because she was always speaking and traveling and doing different things. But her headquarters was here. And I don't know exactly why she came, but she came here and was here for a couple of years. Her presence was known. She did not live here. There's a family known as Anita and Nick D'Onofrio, and they're fundraisers, philanthropists, and she stayed with them when she was here. But she started her youth program right here for a couple of years. Then she went to Westcott. She loved Danbury because there were so many resources there, so she could develop programs and use them as model programs. So from 2005 to 2012, her main headquarters was at Westcott at Whitehall. She had a suite there on the bottom floor, and these are pictures from Peggy Stewart while she was there. This was during that time. She then moved her headquarters to Washington, D.C., where it still is. But I'll talk more about what she did for the area. She definitely had a presence and loved this area. Her home, of course, was Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. That was the only place. I was able to spend summer with her working as a volunteer. And then for the time that she was at Westcott, I also worked very closely with her. So that's why I've been asked to speak. And why it came up is this amazing woman died in the fall at age 91. And she always said, I'm going to die in my bed after speaking to a group and fundraising. She was in California, and that's exactly what happened to her. She had a heart attack. So people are now revisiting her. She's probably one of the 10 most famous women during her time period to change the world and make a difference. There were 3 things she was interested in. The environment, animals, and people. I'm sorry, you're going to have to deal with that. But anyway, I'm going to tell you about her from what I've talked to her about. I've read just about all of her books. There's about 45, 15 for young children. She had such an impact on life here and globally. She was 3 years older than I was. I'm 88, she was 91. She didn't have many friends my age unless they were philanthropists and were donating. So we had quite a close relationship, and she was very open to me. So she was born in London. She was born to a middle-class family. Her mother was a writer. Her father was a businessman, and they divorced very early on. So they became more lower middle class. There wasn't a lot of money. And she was much closer to her mother and her mother's side of the family than she was to her father's. At a very early age, her grandfather gave her not a doll, not a teddy bear. He gave her a chimpanzee. And she loved that chimpanzee, and she carried the chimpanzee everywhere, and she called it Mr. Jubilee. and her love of animals just became amazing. Her mother would only let her have a turtle and a dog, but she read books all about animals. Her favorite book was Dr. Dolittle, and her second favorite book was Tarzan and the Apes. Now, when she was born, her given name was Valerie Jane. So, after reading Tarzan and finding out the hero was Jane, she changed her name to Jane Goodall. Forget the Valerie. So she also had her mother every single night read this special book to her. It was a British book. It was called The Eagle and the Wren. It's about a competition among birds. Who can fly the highest for the longest? Oh, I'm not going to tell you what happens. But anyway, there's a dispute about who wins this race. And what happens in this book is it shows the power of one and the power of teamwork after that. And that's what she was all about. All of us have this power and strength within ourselves. But it's just like what Pete does here. He's a beautiful example of this. Teamwork. He goes out there and he does the grunt work. He works with other people. He brings the community together. And that's what Jane was all about. She was always very smart, always asked questions, was curious, was determined, was independent, was detail-oriented. She would take all kind of notes and write questions and find answers. And one day she always talks about her parents couldn't find her. She was a preschooler. Where was Jane? For 4 hours, she was in the chicken coop. She was observing the chickens, how the eggs hatch. She was taking notes on everything these chickens did and how the egg came about. And they knew very early on that she was a special person. There was an aura about her. She was not like anyone else I had ever met. She did have a disability. It's a rare disability. It's got like 13 letters in it. I can't even pronounce it. Facial recognition. There's 4 famous people that have this same ailment. You can't recognize faces. So you have to look at how a person stands, how they walk, their gait, they smell, how they talk. She gets who they are from everything else but their face. She couldn't see faces. So when you worked with her, you had to say, "Hi, Jane, I'm Darla." So you would immediately identify yourself. And the other people that have this, Alan Alda, Brad Pitt, and Wozniak. And it actually helped her in her research. Because when you have a disability in one area, you nurture and create strength in the other areas. So it really helped her in her research later on. Well, she had 2 goals in life. One was that she was going to go to Kenya. She was going to go on safari. She was going to learn about animals. And then the second thing that she was going to do was she's going to get a college education. Well, there was no money for her to go to college, so she said, "I'll learn it myself." She always liked a challenge. She worked as a secretary. She had secretarial skills. And she also worked as a waitress at night. And she saved all her money and she got to Kenya. and she met Leakey, who was the man who changed her life and our lives as well. What was interesting about her college degree is she didn't get it until she was middle-aged. And she had a high school diploma. She skipped undergraduate and master's and went right into a doctoral program at Oxford. She had written so many books, given so many lectures, made such a difference. What, were they going to make her be an undergraduate and get a master's? No. There's only 8 people that have been known to go like this, right from a high school degree into a doctoral program, where again, oh my goodness, the research that she did. So she did meet her 2 goals. So while she is saving her money and all, she finally gets to Kenya, but she needs money, so she's working as a secretary again while she's spending time doing work on safaris and all. And Leakey is famous and so well known for working with primatology and these various animals. And at the time, you've heard of probably Diane Fossey, and she was with the apes, and there was a woman who was with the orangutan, but Jane Goodall was the one that stood out over the 3. And the reason she stood out is because she didn't just research animals. She went above and beyond. She established the Jane Goodall Institute for Global Issues, and she established the Roots Institute program right here in this area for the youth. And so anyway, Leakey immediately felt her aura. He saw she was special. And the one thing is, research that she did can be, because I did it for 3 days, and I was done after 3 days. Boring. But she didn't mind this. She saw good in everything. And even if it was repetitious in everything, she was willing to do it. She had no scientific research experience whatsoever. And he said, I'm going to let her go. There's something special about her. So she wasn't tricked. He said, how would you like to go to Gombe, which is in Tanzania? It's not an island, but because of the forest and all, you have to go by boat. And spend time there researching. Now, you're going to be alone, just you and the chimps. She had a tribe of about 25 chimps that she worked with for about 20 years, dedicated to this research. She basically camped out. She had a little cabin, no electricity, no water. The boat would come in maybe once a week and deliver anything she would need. She was basically alone. She stayed for 3 and 4, 5 months at a time without going back to the mainland. This is not easy. This is survival. She thrived on it. She absolutely loved it. Now, while she was at Gombe, she did marry. You figure, who's she going to marry in this isolated situation? Well, lo and behold, it was Baron Hugo, and long last name, a Dutchman, who was the most famous animal photographer at the time. He worked for National Geographic and all these other great magazines. So he came to photograph her. They had so much in common. They loved animals. They loved the wilderness. They loved, they hit it off. And he didn't see her that often, but they decided to marry. Now, he had one problem that existed through his life, because he was a wonderful, brilliant, handsome man. He liked his alcohol. But they did have one child, and he was named Hugo Jr., But he was always playing in the dirt and the mud, and he loved being with his mother and the chimpanzees. But she had to be careful they didn't attack him or kidnap him. So anyway, they called him Grub. And Grub he was known for, and I have met Hugo, and I have, met Grub. And her family life is very interesting. So when Grub was young, he was, I guess, as a preschooler, homeschooled. But then she said, you've got to have an education. I don't have time. I'm dealing with the chimpanzees. So she sent him back to London with her mother, and then he went to boarding school. He always felt neglected, abandoned. She spent more time, knew more about the chimpanzee family than she did her own family. And she admits it. And if you read her books, you will see this. She was driven, but she also wanted family. And she always said, ladies, you can't have it all. You have to make a choice at some time. And she was very open with me, and she said, you've made a choice that your family comes first. And I think, as I think back, I didn't make maybe the right choice. But she was so driven, she couldn't keep herself from doing this. So, anyway, she began to work with the chimpanzees. And what is very different is most researchers with animal give them a number. Number 5, number 6. No, these people were like humans. So she thought about her friends and their names, and she gave the chimpanzees the names of the people that she knew. So I remember some of the names. There was like Frodo, and Frodo was very strong and good looking and showed off to all the women. And then there was Flo, and there was Fifi, and Flo was the motherly, nurturing one that people would go to. And Fifi was the one that sort of taught all the other chimpanzees what they needed to do. And then there was Mr. Graybeard, and he was very old and very docile. He lived to his 60s. Most chimpanzees died in their 30s or 40s and all. And then there was Mr. McGregor, and he was like the negotiator, and he was the peace person. And then there was Goliath. Oh, he was like the one who was powerful, and nobody went against whatever he said. And then there was Humphrey, and you've got to have a bully in every group, and Humphrey was the bully. So she really got involved. She knew them. In the beginning, she had to stay far away from them because they can be dangerous. And later on, they were so used to her, she got closer and closer. And eventually, she was adopted basically into their family. They would groom her, they would bring her food, the babies would sit in her lap. But she always knew, look out for this one, uh-oh, look what's happening here, and so on. Well, most people know that she was the breakthrough. She saw how alike these animals were to humans. I mean, it was almost scary. How they developed tools. They took twigs, different type of leaves, rocks, nuts, anything in the environment, branches, made them into tools that they could use to succeed with. She also saw how disciplined and the rules and how they taught them, and how they passed down traditions, and how they worked with each other or against each other. There were wars, there were battles. They didn't just go at each other, there were strategies. But their emotions were so much like people. They had their good days, their bad days. There were people they got along with, people they didn't. What were the buttons that you would touch It was so similar. And this is what she wrote about. Nobody had ever watched animals like this and seen the details. What she would do is go up, it was almost like a mountain. It would take her 45 minutes to get to the top each day. And she would observe for a couple of days just one animal, write everything. You know, how many times it defecated, you know, how long it slept, what it ate, who we got angry with, who groomed him, and so on. So that's what her life was like up there. And when I first became involved with her was at East Ridge Middle School, 7th grade. And I decided that my students were going to read her book, My Life with the Chimpanzees. It was a scholastic 75-page paperback. One chapter was about her life and her research. The next chapter was about Frodo, or one of the chimps. And she alternated chapters, and you learned so much about her, and you learned so much about the chimpanzees. But at the back of the book, it said, I hoped you enjoyed my book. I hoped you learned a lot about chimpanzees. Now, I would like you to write me questions. You need to know more about these animals. And she gave you the address. I had to do letter writing. It was part of my curriculum. So we're going to write to Jane Goodall. And we did. And I said, look, I'm not saying she's going to write you back, but we're going to give her a shot. Whenever you write letters, you don't know if you're going to get a return letter. Well, I did this in the spring. I ain't getting letters. Over the summer, because they used their home addresses, they started getting letters. In the fall, the next year, they would come in and say, Mrs. Shaw, my letter from Jane Goodall. Some it took a year and a half, because she was sitting there observing handwritten, a page, 2-page, 3-page letters she would send. Plus it took time by the slow boats that went there. So anyway, that's pretty much what happened. Now, how did I get involved with her? I was working at WestCon. I was in my late 60s, and I worked with a man named Rick Assalta. He was a teacher at ACE, which is the alternative school in Danbury. There's about 125 students there. They're not bad, or they're not anything. They just were turned off. They couldn't go to the largest high school in Connecticut, which was Danbury High School, that had like 3,000 or 4,000 students. They went to the alternative school. Now, he was a Korean vet. He was exposed to Agent Orange. He got cancer. He had all sorts of health problems, but that didn't stop him. And that's what Jane was all about. And so he really gravitated toward people with health problems, mental health, disabilities. So I worked with him and his students in fundraising and getting people involved so that he could send money to Tanzania. So each summer, there's so many handicapped people there because there's not the help, there's not the sanitation, the government. He would go and he would buy crutches and wheelchairs. And he would buy these things that would help, canes, the people. He started rehab centers there. And he threw this huge special Olympics that, again, brought people and brought money to. And he did this for so many years. And one day he said to me, oh, Darla, you do so much work, volunteer work. Why don't you go, work with Jane Goodall in Tanzania? Because I did do humanitarian travel. Not for the entire summer. And I knew, is Ben going to think this is a good idea? Ben usually supports me. you know what he did? But you know, there are a lot of health issues, and malaria, and and it's not a crime-free area by any means. It's very dangerous. So anyway, I kind of put it on the back burner. But then, ironically, I did volunteer for a long time at FCI. I taught the GED courses there to the women so that they could get a high school diploma. Lo and behold, checking out in front of me, security, is Jane Goodall. I did not realize that when she came to the area, she would go there. And she started all sorts of gardens at FCI for the people. And she brought in small animals and talked to them. But the thing that was the most fascinating about her is she took what she knew about the chimpanzees and related it to these women who had mostly been involved in drug trafficking with males, or had been abused, or had been and she talked about the chimps in relationship to it was powerful. She went to the Women's Center and she did the same thing. She was all over and people didn't realize it. She didn't need fame or fortune. She was so simple and basic. So anyway, we're checking out of security, and I said, Jane, I'm a friend of Rick Assaltus. I'm Darla Shaw. She said, oh my goodness, I've heard of you through Rick. Can we talk? So we sat on a bench for an hour and a half. It was like I was talking to my friend Ronnie or Jean. She was so real, so down to earth. You know, when I said, I don't do any science, I don't know what I would do there. And she said, my God, you're a teacher. The schools here are like in the 1800s. They're sitting at benches. All they do is memorize and rote and do worksheets. You do education through the arts, through movement and music and theater and all. And she said, that's what they need. So I thought about it a little bit more. And I talked to my family because I wasn't going to go if my family did not support me. So I decided to go, and I talked to my classes. And I told them I was going to spend the summer. And I wasn't going to see her a lot, because she's not there anywhere a lot. She's always traveling. 300 days at least out of 365 she's traveling. Sometimes speaking up to 4 times a day. I have never seen a woman with such passion and determination. So one of my students, Mei Ling, who is now a 5th grade teacher in Fairfield, said, you know, that's a great experience you're going to have. She said, someday I might want to do something like this. And I said, you know, your someday could be right now. How would you like to go with me? Because I would feel much better at my age going with a younger person. She was so talented in science, just the opposite of what I was. And so she went with me. And she was also into recycling and composting and all these things. She ran the greatest program. These kids would go out. There was garbage everywhere. We would take things out of the garbage. They would make objects that she showed them and sell them. And we would make money for the school. Thank God I had Mei Ling. Sometimes I don't know, because it was tough. It was a very tough experience. We always had an interpreter. The kids did learn English. It was very, very basic. We were always with guards who had guns. We were in a compound that was surrounded by a fence and everything. So anyway, when I was there, she would come every once in a while, every other week or so, she would come to her home base. And she would have a report out. And we would have a big campfire. her compound was on the ocean. And we would have hot dogs and s'mores, and each of us would have to report out what we were doing with the chimpanzees or whatever aspect. There were about 12 of us. They were all in their 20s or early 30s, except for me. I was 2 or 3 times older than everybody else. And after we reported, I mean, she would give us such insight. And then it was almost like going to church. I mean, it was so inspirational, but it was so basic and words that we could relate to. And we would have these long campfires on the beach when she was there. And the house wasn't fancy. It was big. That's all I can say. With the kitchen, she had knocked down walls, and there were dorm rooms, one for the males, one for the females, and there was mosquito netting everywhere because of malaria. And she had malaria, I don't know how many times, and she was not like a really strong, she was a very tiny, petite person, you know. Well, anyway, on weekends, we didn't work. And the young people, there were all kind of mountains, Kilimanjaro and everything. They would go hiking the mountains, they would go on safari, they would go camping, they would go to all the clubs and the bars, and then there was me. And I wasn't interested, you know, or I didn't have the physical ability to do these things. So I would work on, you know, props and plans and everything, write in my diary and read. And I was happy. And then I would walk in the compound, because it was a big compound, and there were a lot of little cottages and things. So I'm walking the first week. I see a guy in a garden and everything. He goes, "Hi, you're new here," and everything. So I said, "Hi, I'm Darla. I'm volunteering in the schools." And he goes, "Hi, I'm Hugo." I go, "Oh my God, that's her first husband." So he lived on the compound. And, you know, she paid his way and all. And he was amazing. What a storyteller. The pictures. So every Saturday, I would go and I would have tea and crumpets with Hugo. And, you know, we had such a great relationship. So I missed the bars and I missed the hikes, but I had a great relationship with Hugo as well as Jane. So then there was another very long house that kept being added to. And there were these women there, and there were a lot of kids. There were about a dozen kids. They were like babies up to 19, teenagers and everything age. And so the kids would follow me. And of course, having very white skin, very white hair, they knew the story Snow White. They called me Snow White. So I felt like, you know, the Pied Piper. Here I was, Snow White, with all these little kids and everything. And so the woman comes over, one of the women, and said, "Come on in." And so I went in, and they gave me a meal, and the kids, you know, so I started singing and clapping and, you know, the things I was doing in the school. So whose home am I in? I'm in Grub's home. Okay, so Grub, he is now a fisherman and a hunter, which his mother does not like. But he's not close to his mother at all. He still holds this terrible grudge that she abandoned him. And it was very open about this. And so there was one that he considered his wife. I don't know how formal the marriage. She was Tanzanian, and she had 3 children. And when these 3 children grew up, they actually followed in Jane's footsteps. They believed in her causes, and I was so glad. And actually at the end, before she died, she had reconciled with her son, not greatly, but he was a boat builder. He didn't hunt, he didn't fish. The children, you know, called her grandmother, you know, and that type of thing. But it was so amazing to me that I had this relationship with her first husband, and I actually spent more time. Every weekend I would spend time with her family while she was away. There were 3 times that I spent with her individually, and they were all very special. I was there a couple weeks, and I was in bed with my mosquito netting and my books and everything, and she walks in, and she was so beautiful. And you always see her hair in a ponytail, and it was down, and it was long, and she had on a cotton nightgown and bare feet, and never wore makeup, never dressed up. And she was just beautiful. And she sits on the end of my bed, cross-legged, and she said, I want to talk about what you're doing in the schools. And so we talked all about the schools. It was very interesting. And then one day I'm sitting out on the porch, and it was night again, and everyone else was out somewhere. And she said, you've been spending a lot of time with my family, I said. I said, yeah, I'm here on weekends, you know. She said, tell me about my family. I'm like, okay. Because she didn't have time. She didn't have time for relationship. She didn't have friends. She had Mary. Mary was her assistant. Went everywhere, did everything with her. And Mary was maybe 10 years younger than she was. So I told her, you know, what a relationship. And she opened up entirely about, did she make the right choice? Can women do everything? Do you follow your passion? Where do you make changes? What is your real legacy? I mean, it was deep. I was like really surprised. And then the 3rd time was just before I left. And before I left, she gave me her chimpanzee pin that she gave to special people. And this was just one of her last books. The first one was The Shadow of Man, where she really chronicles the comparison. And then this is We Have to Have Hope. And her last words dealt with, we have to have hope. And again, we have to exert power and work as a team. And we have to stay active. And that's what she was all about. And then she gave me this frame, and there's a picture of me with her there. So she thanked me for what I had done. And then she said, I have some advice for you. I thought, oh, that's good. I couldn't imagine, you know, what she would say. And she said, Darla, you're volunteering too much. I said, I thought you were all about volunteerism, helping others, ecology, people, and animals. And she said, no, that's not what I'm talking about. She said, you go and you work on other people's programs. She said, you have the maturity, you have the wisdom, you have the creativity and the determination that you need to look around. You need to see a need, and you have to establish the program. And it was true. You know, I was a great volunteer, but I didn't have the self-confidence at the time. She gave this to me. This is what she gave to people. She empowered you that you were much stronger and better than you thought that you were. And when I came back, and I think even here, and you know, Betsy, well, my ideas are weird, they're out of the box. I've started a lot of different programs. Some are successful, some are a disaster. You know, that's okay. But I did start my own programs. And then, in my 80s, I became very ill, and I had to go to assisted living. And I figured, okay, I'm shot, it's all over. And then I said, no. What would Jane have done? And Jane would have looked around and figured out what she could have done to help others. And so I had always been involved with Alzheimer's. I spend a lot of time. I write plays, readers' theater, we put them on. I play the accordion, the steel drums, and I have an Alzheimer's band. They look so forward to this. I do word games that I did with preschool kids, but with new action. And I started giving lectures and talks. I do all kind of things there. I look around and I say, what is the need? What can I do? And then I enlist the people with the good hearts and the big hearts. Some of them work and some of them don't. And that's okay. So I'm getting to where she comes to WestCon. Okay. So she comes to WestCon in 2005. She was in this area. She was looking around for a university and a town that she could model the roots and shoots for young people. It's a great name because you plant the seeds when the kids are little, and then they begin to grow. They have their roots. They believe in the environment and all, and then they grow and they sprout. So that's how she got the idea for that. So she looked at Danbury. Oh my God. It had a women's prison. It had a women's center. It had Dorothy Day soup kitchen. It had all kind of food pantry. It had this huge ethnic base, different religions, different cultures. It had schools that believed in it. It had nursing homes and healthcare and mental centers. It had conservation. It had parks. It had waterways. There was so many programs that she could develop in this area. And she went to the president of WestCon and said, I got a deal for you. And she knew how to work a deal. She was a wheeler dealer. How do you think she got all this money? All these philanthropists. She stayed at their home. She said, I will come here. I will do 2 large speeches each year for you. And I will promote all these programs, develop them, so that people will come here and see models. And I need rooms here. And the president gave her a suite of rooms. I think there are 3 or 4. Whitehall, which used to be the old Danbury High School. It's on White Street, and it's still there. And what I think is so exciting right now, there are 3 interns that are working right here at the Scott House that are part of Roots and Shoots programs that she started back in 2005. And she started the Roots and Shoots program in Tanzania in the late 1990s, and then she brought it right here to Ridgefield and to Danbury. And what she started with, she said, you have to have a day of service. All the students still have a day of service. They take the day off from school. They are involved in a community project that takes the whole day and then expands out during the year. She encouraged all of us to have a service project as part of our curriculum, and most of the faculty did this. We didn't have big Earth Days before she came. Oh, she started Earth Day programs that were so comprehensive and inclusive. We had Animal Rights Day programs. We had Day of Peace programs. I mean, she did so much in so many areas to model for us what you could do to help those 3 areas. Well, she then, of course, had Rick Asalta. Oh, he did so much here as well. Rick recently retired. He went to Puerto Rico. He's doing amazing, amazing programs in Puerto Rico. She had Lori Weinstein, and you will see many of the professors in here that worked with her. And Laurie Weinstein was anthropology, archaeology. She did programs along that line, but she loved permagardens. And Jane was huge on permagardens. And she started them at WestCon, and they spread all over. And community gardens, where people would grow the food and then give it to people in the community. And I remember Dr. Howard Russix, he was big into biology and nature trails and water, and he got his students, and they were involved in the Still River. There's a little part of the Still River in Ridgefield, and then it became the hatting industry. It went into Danbury. It became heavily polluted. And how do you get the pollution out of it? He did a lot with that. Candlewood Lake was dug by men. I mean, you know, it wasn't what were its problems? What could they do? You know, he was involved in so much like that. And each of us had that believed in her and followed her. Some people considered us like her disciples, because that's how important she was. And what I did basically, I love oral histories. I connected the 5th graders with the senior center, and we did all kind of oral histories in a program once a month. I started peace gardens in the schools. You would have a little waterway, you would have benches and flowers and bushes and paths. It was used for special events, holiday. But these peace gardens were used also in place of timeout rooms. That when kids were having problems, instead of staring at the walls, they would go out with an aid into the peace garden and talk out the problems, you know. I did a lot with Danbury Comes Alive. I was able to get grants, and we put on productions, the arts. About Danbury, it's such a city, rich like Ridgefield, with so much history. And we did it through acting and music. And we brought in the parents who were immigrants to share this with them. And as I said, I've always been involved. Scott Russell, I don't know if any of you know him. He was the national spokesperson for Alzheimer's. He lives on South Salem Road. We started an Alzheimer's program in the school, 3rd grade and up. These kids learn so much. So we all had these amazing programs that people wouldn't necessarily have thought of before if she hadn't been the stimulus. So what's happening now? Her birthday is April 3rd. It just passed. They have now made it Jane Goodall Day because she had so much of an impact, and a lot of activities are being done. Also, WestCon celebrated all of the programs that she started there with a big memorial to her quite recently. I've also been involved in a documentary that's come out. There are numerous documentaries about her, but this one is different. This one is called Dar es Salaam, which is the capital of Tanzania, to Danbury. And many years ago, when Jane came and started her program, there was a young middle school student named Peter Shaker. He was in her Roots and Shoots program there. And he just was so inspired by her. He became a teacher, and he started all the Roots and Shoots programs around here. And then he became a movie maker. And this summer at Bethel Movie House, they're going to show his movie from when he was in middle school as a student to being a teacher, involving his students. And I was interviewed from this along with a lot of the people that I have talked about. But Jane does not leave you as a person. When they say leave a legacy, You know, most people don't leave a legacy. You can leave a much smaller legacy, but she did have a real global presence. And I hope you have a better understanding now of her role. I mean, when I did the bus tour of the 50 most important women in Ridgefield, I think the reaction that was the greatest was when I said that Alice Paul, the greatest suffragette of all time, lived here for 40 years. And also that Jane Goodall had an amazing presence, starting her youth program, Roots and Shoots, here in Ridgefield for 2 or 3 years, and then transferring it for the next 8 years to Westcott. Okay, any questions? Any insights? Anyone want to share anything they knew about Jane? We have 5 minutes left.
I want to know what these pictures are from. The pictures on the screen. What occasion was this?
And that's Mr. T. That isn't the original monkey. There was a pilot during, I forget which war. He was shot down, and he lived, but he lost his sight. He was so inspired by her because hope, goals, keep going, don't give up. He sent her this, what he thought was a chimpanzee, was a monkey because he couldn't see. And his goal was to become a magician. How can you become a magician if you're blind? But he did it. And in recognition of reaching his goal, and that's when you see her, that is Mr. H. His last name started with his H. So she started with Jubilee, and she ended with Mr. H. Okay.
So this was a presentation at Westcott?
Oh, these are all Westcott.
And then she had a dinner at Westcott.
She had what?
A dinner at Westcott after her presentation?
Yeah,
that's what this
depending
is. Okay.
On who was running it. Yeah, she had a very big presence there. When she was traveling, which was most of the time she wasn't there, but when she was there, she was there. She used her time very well.
She spoke at Founders Hall one time too, way back when it was first started.
I couldn't hear what
She spoke at Founders Hall.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't realize that.
I recall when she first moved into the house it's adjacent to the community center. It's on the community center grounds, so to speak. That was her first house in Ridgefield that it was too small apparently, and they couldn't continue the programming there. But the reason she came to Ridgefield was, I think the director of her programming was from Ridgefield, and that's how she got her start here. He was the director of something, either programming or her whatever, her Roots and Shoots program, whatever it was. He lived here in Ridgefield.
See, I asked the researcher, I talked to Sally and Jack, and nobody had, so I mean, that's why it's good to know, because there's a lot when she went to Westcott, because things were documented, but here, I didn't realize that, yeah.
I lived kind of diagonally across the street at the time to that house, and I just remembered that her presence was there for a while.
Okay, where is this house?
It's on the community center's grounds. It's on the corner.
I asked Jack because that's what I remember.
Yes.
And he said that wasn't true.
No, but that's where she was initially.
Yeah, that's interesting, yeah. Because when I took the tour of the 50, I talked about that house.
Yeah.
And that's why I didn't mention it today.
Well, that's what I recall because I was living,
I heard
because I
that.
said to the kids, Jane Goodall's like
Right
across the
there.
street from us.
Yeah.
I think she's right.
Well, thank you all for coming. You've been a wonderful